1992, Chicago, Illinois. Claire is alone babysitting for the Johnsons when Billy pulls up in his motorcycle. She's not even going out with Billy, she's going out with Michael, but she always had the hots for Billy. He was kind of a bad boy, whereas Michael is just so nice. So Billy arrives and she lures him upstairs into the bathroom and she asks him,
"Have you ever heard of Candyman?"
She says his right hand is sawn off. He has a hook jammed in the bloody stump. And if you look in the mirror and say his name 5 times, he'll appear behind you, breathing down your neck.
You want to try it?
And so Billy begins. He looks in the mirror and he says, Candyman, 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 Candyman,
Candyman.
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the ghost story and we review Bernard Rose's masterpiece, Candyman. Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a number of weeks. We are currently in the midst of exploring the evolution of the ghost story, and this is part 12, in which, as that intro suggested, we're going to be talking solely about Candyman from 1992 in spoilerific detail. Can't wait to discuss this. Candyman, is it a slasher movie? Is it a ghost movie? Is it a folk tale? Is it a vampire movie? Who knows what this is? But we're going to discuss it at length this week. So before I introduce my guest, here are a few contact details. You can email us. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. You can also subscribe to us on Letterboxd. That's letterboxd.com/evolutionpod. And if you want to meet other listeners, chat about horror, chat about the podcast, please do join the Evolution of Horror discussion group that can be found on Facebook. Please do subscribe to us on iTunes or any podcast platform that you currently use. Any subscriptions really help us. And if you get a chance, please drop a little rating or review on iTunes. Again, very helpful. It helps us get discovered by new listeners. And if you do drop me a review, I will give you a little shout out to say thank you at the end of this episode. So let's get started. I'm very excited to introduce this guest. It's somebody who I've been wanting to get on the podcast for a very long time. He is a journalist, he is a podcaster, he is even a director, currently in the midst of finishing his debut feature film. It is my great pleasure to welcome Sam Ashurst to the podcast. Sam, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you.
It's just, for people who don't know, tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do.
I do quite a lot of things at the moment.
You do? You're pretty busy.
Yeah. I write regularly for a few websites. So you'll find my stuff on Digital Spy and Yahoo. And in addition to that, I'm a co-host of the Arrow Video podcast with Dan Martin, who you've
Wonderful.
had.
We've had a couple of times
on the show.
Yeah.
And I also am a director.
Amazing.
So I'm hoping that that will start to take off a bit more over the next sort of year or so.
Fantastic.
So I don't have to do as many jobs
yeah,
at the
as
same
many
time.
other things. yeah, I know the feeling. Tell me a little bit about your film then. So you've just finished shooting. Is it your debut?
Yeah. So it's my first film. I've done. I had a short film at Fright Fest a couple of years ago.
Yes, and it won an award, didn't it?
Yeah, it won Best Scare.
Awesome.
From Total Film. I had that at Fright Fest, and it was an incredible experience. It's such a nice festival to be a part of. It really is. I don't know. Have you been?
I have a few times. Yeah. Love it. And I've had Alan Jones on the podcast before.
Of course. Yeah.
And it's such a great atmosphere, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a real community. It's a real sort of family feeling. So to be actually, I think I first went in like 2002, something like that.
Amazing.
I remember seeing Donnie Darko there, and to show my short there was quite an incredible experience. So then from that, I ended up making a music video for Channel 4's Random Acts, which was another incredible experience. But actually, it was doing that music video where basically they'd give me a budget, a low budget, but a budget.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked around and thought to myself, oh man, I've got all the crew I need to make a film. Yeah. If only I could make a film in a day. Mm-hmm. So I decided to make a film in a day. So that's what I've done, sort of. So basically, it was actually when I was recording, me and Dan were going to record the Villainess audio commentary.
Yeah.
And it was kind of just around this time. And I said to Dan, I want to make a film in a day. How do I do that? And he said, oh, well, someone gave me some advice many years ago, which is if you want to shoot a film in a short space of time, adapt a play. Because everyone knows what they're doing, and you can move through it.
Material's kind of there.
Material's there, the actors are there, and you can move through it very quickly. So I kind of thought about this, and I'd worked with an actor named James Swanton, and I'd seen when I was sort of reading up about him that he'd done a one-man show called Frankenstein's Creature. Mm-hmm. So I asked James to send me that, and I read it, and it was one of the best things I've ever read in my life.
Wow.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
It is, honestly, I'm not hyping it up because, I've now made a film of it, but it is an astonishing piece of writing. So yeah, I got my crew together, and we shot James's performance in a day because I decided to do it in one take, which is a bit ambitious, but
love it.
So
you've got a Russian arc with it.
Exactly. Yeah. So then there's other bits and pieces which I won't go into now because I want to save them as a surprise.
Yeah.
But yeah, all in all, it took a week to do.
That's amazing.
In terms of what we shot, and then hopefully everyone will get to see it, how it's all come together at some point this year.
Right, what fantastic. That's amazing. And it must be, it just goes to show, doesn't it, how much work goes into making films, because it sounds like a huge ordeal to do, like you say, do something in one day.
Yeah, well, this is it. Every film's different, and I guess when you've got a longer time to shoot, you don't quite have to do. Well, I suppose you can do, and it'd be nice to, but I don't think people often have the opportunity to have such an intense preparation period. Yeah. Because we did quite a lot of rehearsal stuff. We had a lot of conversations about how we're going to approach it. And so, yeah, it was very intense because we knew that basically we had that day and we had to get everything performance-wise for the film in that day. So it is intense.
Yeah. So what's the hope that it might sort of end up at festivals later on in the year? Or
yeah, well, that's it. I'm at the moment it's looking like, this is the aim. As long as nothing goes wrong, it should be finished by mid-April. And then I'm going to start submitting it to various festivals. It is a weird film. It's very much art house meets grindhouse.
Brilliant.
So
it sounds amazing. I reckon that will be. We'll probably be seeing that at Fright Fest in August on one of the Discovery screens. That sounds like classic Discovery screen.
I really, really hope so. We'll see. Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Amazing. So exciting. Brilliant. Well, can't wait to see it. So you have. Obviously, by the sounds of it, you present the Arrow video podcast. You've just made an adaptation of Frankenstein. You're a horror fan, are you?
Just a little bit. Yeah. Absolutely.
Is that kind of always been a lifelong passion for you? It'll go all the way back.
Completely. Yeah. To be completely honest, I did take a break from horror. Basically, my first kind of memories of horror. In fact, one of my earliest memories is my dad was. A kind of a VHS bootlegger.
Oh, brilliant!
Yeah, brilliant. And he had no sense of what was appropriate to show me when I was growing up. So I saw a lot of intense stuff when I was very young.
Right.
But the one that weirdly, in as much, stuff that he showed me, the first thing I remember actually was he had Michael Jackson's Thriller video on VHS.
Get away!
and it scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
Like, I was 4 years old, so it was around the time when it was kind of first out.
Yeah.
And it scared me to such an extent that it kind of became this like repressed trauma where I watched a Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, that sort of 80s TV series, and there's an episode where they went to a village, or like this abandoned village, and they're going to sleep in the beds there, and these arms come out of the beds and out of the walls, and it kind of reminded me of the bit where the zombies like come out of in Thriller. And so from that point on, I started sleeping on the floor. I was so scared because I was like, right, okay, if they're going to come out of the bed and the wall, if I sleep on the floor, I'll be fine.
Oh my God, you weren't worried about them coming out the floor?
No, exactly. It's a child's logic.
Yeah.
And so, and the other sort of memory I have is of going to see Ghostbusters at the cinema when I was like around 6.
Yeah.
And again, I've got such a vivid memory of the librarian ghost at the start.
Yeah.
And being so scared that I was scared for the entire rest of the film.
It's so funny, isn't it? Because we just talked about that film on the podcast.
Yeah, no, it's a great episode. Yeah,
thank
really
you.
good.
Yeah, and it is one of those things where, we considered it, and I was like, is it it is, because
it really
obviously
is.
It's thought of, as a comedy, but it terrified me as a child as well, especially that library scene. Absolutely horrific.
Yeah, that's it. And like the weird thing is like I remember not only was it marketed as a comedy, it was also marketed as a kids film.
Yes,
it was on like kids shows at that time, and I was really excited about it, and I was like drawing the logo and all that kind of thing. And then I went to see it, and I was literally terrified for the whole film because I kept waiting for something else like that to happen.
And not only are there terrifying scares, there's inappropriate blowjob jokes. I mean, it's not a kids film.
That went over my head.
It's hilarious. Yeah, very funny. I had the exact same experience actually with Thriller. I think I talked about the very first episode of this podcast. It was my first ever introduction as well, and I was not only obsessed with the video itself, but I had the VHS. I don't know if you remember, that also had the making of after it. Kind of long documentary with John Landis. And everything. And I think that was what had me hooked from the start of just kind of filmmaking, horror, everything. Really.
See, this is it. Cool. It was kind of different for me because like this stuff scared me so much, and I was, I was a film obsessive from a very, very early age. Like, my dad showed me Godzilla when I was like, I don't know, how old would I have been? Brilliant. I think like 7. Godzilla 85, and just lifelong obsession with films. Yeah. But I did avoid horror for a while just because it scared me so much.
And not in a kind of fun way.
Not in a fun way, exactly. And I've as I've gotten older, I've realised like what a gift that is to be scared, and what a gift horror films give people, in that if you go and see a good horror film, you are transported from your reality more than any other genre of movie. Totally. I mean, they all work on that level. They all sort of take us in. But horror films can envelop you in a way that other films don't. And, that's why it's my favourite genre. But yeah, back then. And so it was really around the time that I saw Candyman for the first time. Right. That was it. Every horror film in the video shop, I was renting it. And it's kind of probably the best period of my life.
Yeah, isn't it exciting?
And Candyman was in the mix.
The thought of, back then when you haven't yet seen all of those incredible classics.
Yeah, exactly. Like The Thing. Exactly.
So good. Good. And it is funny how, you are so terrified as a child in a kind of horrible way. And then as an adult, you just yearn to get that feeling back again in any horror film you watch. I want to be that scared again now. Totally. Every time.
Exactly. And I'm quite lucky in that, in as many films I've seen and, as many trips to the cinema as I've taken, that's never really gone away. I still get really scared if something's scary.
What was the last big horror film that really scared you? Do you remember?
Weirdly, and it's it's not a great film, but it doesn't really take much to scare me. But the Blair Witch reboot.
Oh right, yeah.
I saw that at Dolby, which is a screening room in London. Okay, so we might have even been at the same screening, but I was absolutely terrified, but purely because the sound design in that film, like the film itself, not great, but the sound design is incredible.
Yes, and there's no better place than Dolby.
Yeah, exactly. So I felt like I was in the movie. So
That's it. I think the last, probably more recently than that, for me, it was at Fright Fest. And there was one movie at Fright Fest that really got under my skin last year, and it was the one with the Stillborn. Did you watch Stillborn?
Oh, that was really good. Yeah,
that really got me.
Yeah, that was a really great film, actually.
Yeah. I was talking with Andy Neumann actually on this podcast about how, every year you go to Fright Fest and you see so many brilliant films, but usually there's maybe a small handful of ones that actually scare you, because a lot of them, sometimes they're more fun or they're more visceral or whatever, but that was the one for me at last year's Fright Fest. Absolutely terrified me.
Yeah,
it was really good.
There was what was it called? The Killing Ground.
Yes.
That really got to me.
Different kind of scare.
Different kind of scare, exactly. It's more kind of like the Wolf Creek, super disturbing. Scary.
Yes, absolutely.
Another film that actually is kind of relevant to today's discussion that got to me, The Babadook. That freaked me out. And it's kind of got a similar vibe.
It totally does. Yeah. Which is, very interesting. Amazing. Well, let's get into it. I mean, just briefly, before we get into Candyman, what we've been talking about this sort of series of episodes is the more kind of supernatural stuff, ghost stuff, haunted houses, or whatever else kind of spins on that. What are your kind of thoughts on that kind of subgenre compared to the more visceral slasher, other ends of the spectrum?
I'd say that ghost stories, ghost movies probably scare me more. I mean, I've already sounded like a complete wuss on this podcast.
It's great,
sleeping on the floor because of Dungeons and Dragons. But of all the sort of subgenres, ghost stories scare me the most.
Yeah,
it's the only horror genre that really gives me goosebumps.
Me too.
Gives me an actual kind of physical reaction. And I haven't really kind of put my finger on why that is. But there's just something. I think it's because the majority of ghost movies take place in, like, the worst stuff happens in safe spaces.
Yes.
So areas of the house or your life where you think that, and it's very recognizable, it happens in people's houses, it happens in people's bedrooms.
Yeah.
And so, I remember watching, when I lived on my own, I watched Paranormal Activity 2 with the lights off, and literally scrambled to turn the lights on when it finished, because that shit scares me, man.
That is, we're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks, but that is the one that really gets you, because it is you're not safe in your own bed in your own home.
Exactly,
that's the whole point of that film, isn't it?
Exactly,
it's wonderful.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's kind of similar for a lot of the great ghost movies.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's why. We've talked a lot about television ghosts, M.R. James and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, ghost movies work really well on the small screen as well. I think, don't they? Because again, you're watching them in your house on your own or whatever.
Like, I'm actually getting goosebumps now, remembering watching Whistle and I'll Come to You for the first time.
Yeah.
And that gave me that, being in the cinema watching Ghostbusters feeling.
Yes.
Like, the ending is just so, and it's just.
It's so wonderful
in terms of its pacing, and where it leads you to that moment.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is one of the scariest things I've ever seen, and I don't really know why. No. Because if you describe it to someone, which we won't do here in case you haven't seen it, but if you describe it to someone, then they're like, okay, nothing. So what?
Yeah, it's nothing.
But it's amazing.
It's testament to how brilliant the filmmaking is in that you do watch virtually nothing happen for the first 30 minutes, and then something happened in the last 2 minutes, and that's it, but not much,
And exactly. And when we say nothing much happened, like, really nothing much happens in that first.
It's a lot of just eating breakfast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing, absolutely amazing.
Have you ever heard of Candyman? If you look in the mirror, you say his name 5 times.
In cities everywhere,
Candyman,
they whisper his name.
Right. Candyman.
It's just a story.
Candyman.
Candyman.
Just a ghost story.
Candyman.
An entire community starts attributing the daily horrors of their lives to a mythical figure.
The legend first appeared in 1890. He was attacked, mutilated, and burned to death. Poor Candyman.
Helen, a woman died in there. Leave it. Everyone knows he isn't real.
That's modern oral folklore.
Everyone. Except Helen Lyle.
Bernadette! It ain't safe around here.
I don't scare too easy. Wanna know about Ruthie Jean? They ain't never gonna catch him.
Who?
Candyman.
Who is that?
I came for you.
Do I know you?
Now, she is about to discover
Helen? Get out! Get out!
what's behind the mystery.
I'm sick.
What's behind the legend.
Listen, he's under the bed!
And most terrifying of all,
Come with me.
what's behind the mirror.
He's here.
Candyman. You don't have to believe. Just beware.
Candyman is about a postgraduate named Helen who, along with her friend Bernadette, is writing a thesis about urban myths, and they're interviewing a lot of people, and they stumble across the story of Candyman, who's a killer who basically appears if you say his name 5 times in front of a mirror. And Helen, I'm not sure why she does this, but she decides to try it out. And the film goes from there.
So we will go completely spoilerific for this review, so we can discuss everything up until the end.
Yes.
We do spoiler warnings at the beginning. So you've talked briefly about this already. So the first time you saw it, so this was one of the movies that kind of got you into horror, did it?
Exactly, yeah. And, it was basically in that sort of, that period where I was just watching everything. And I kind of particularly connected with it partly because, my stepdad is black, my mum's white, obviously, and it was sort of interesting to me on that level. Like seeing something that I didn't necessarily see, certainly not in any of the horror films that I'd seen, that kind of representation. But also because I kind of came to horror through music, and it's still one of the best soundtracks ever.
It really is.
And like I've got it on vinyl over there. I'm obsessed with it. It was in that sort of that period where I was watching everything, and it just stood out.
Yeah, it is absolutely incredible. I think the first time I saw it, I was a teenager, and I was in the midst of, all of those kind of, I was sort of gore-hungry kind of slashers and all that kind of stuff, body horror. And I remember what struck me most about Candyman is that it wasn't just this, I don't know, boogeyman who comes out and kills people. There was something way sort of darker about it. And everything that Helen goes through in the film, I remember going, oh, this isn't kind of fun scares. This is proper scares. This is proper disturbing stuff in this.
Absolutely. It's kind of darker and kind of more elegant as well.
Yes, yeah.
And actually, as we're talking about it, it might be, one of the early times where I really got into that mixture of art house and grindhouse, because it does feel
exactly
like an art film, but with these really, really horrific elements.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, we've talked about this briefly on Twitter and this kind of thing, and there's been lots of discussions I've had with listeners about this.
Yeah.
I didn't include Candyman in sort of slasher series that I did before Christmas, and now I'm lumping it in at the moment with ghosts and that kind of thing. To be perfectly honest, I wouldn't know where to place this film.
Absolutely.
But I'm putting it here. But what do you think? I mean, would you'd class this more of a slasher film?
Oh, I would.
Yes.
I can totally see where you're coming from in terms of it being a ghost story. And actually, one of the things that's really interesting about it to me is that it's about urban myths.
Yes.
And it almost feels like an urban myth itself, in that it's been repeated so often that it's taken on all these other elements.
Yeah.
So it is really hard to classify. And I think Bernard Rose talks about it in terms of being a vampire movie. He compares Candyman to Dracula, which it has that, especially when she's around him and she's kind of being mesmerised by him.
She's kind of under his thrall.
Yeah, exactly. So, but for me, the reason I would classify it as a slasher movie is, partly because I think that's the majority of people do see it as a slasher.
They do, of course.
It was number 8 in Bloody Disgusting's top 13 slashers, and Philip Glass sort of joked in an interview about the fact he's done this slasher and it's made him more money than, like, he still gets checks from it. It's one of the most successful things he's ever done. But for me, it's most interesting as a slasher in terms of like its setting, and obviously, Candyman has a lot of similarities to Freddy.
Yes.
He's been killed by a group. He's come back, not necessarily to take revenge, but sort of. But actually, right? Okay, I'm going to go all over the place here. Go on. One of the really interesting themes, maybe we'll come back to it, of this is that it's not that he's coming back to take revenge, it's that he wants a legacy. And it's really interesting to me that he's an artist.
Yes.
And that he wants to be remembered, which is, a big part of what compels people to make art in the first place. And his entire existence is dependent on him being remembered by people, and that's his priority.
So true. And also, artists famously are mainly remembered when they're dead.
Exactly. And it's in on those levels, it's really interesting that he's also associated with bees, because bees are kind of like, they're like the artists of the animal kingdom, like they create and they dance and all of this stuff. But to go back to the slasher thing, what makes it especially interesting to me is, it's similar to Freddy in so many ways, but it doesn't take place in suburbia, which is a major difference between it and traditional slasher movies. So it's set in the projects, and in the 1930s, the American government basically had a housing crisis, and they decided to segregate. So they put the white people in suburbia, they built suburban homes for white people, and then they pushed out black people into the project. So if you're going to do a slasher movie with a black lead, you don't do it in suburbia necessarily, especially if you want to sort of talk about those ideas. And it's there's a book called The Colour of Law, and so it talks about the state-sponsored system of segregation and how the government's efforts were primarily designed to provide housing to white middle-class, lower middle-class families. African Americans and other people of colour were left out of new suburban communities and pushed instead into urban housing projects. So that's by a guy named Richard Rothstein, and it's a really interesting book. But it really ties into Candyman, I think.
It absolutely does. Which we get into, definitely. And I think you're totally right. And you're right. The majority of people out there would see it as a slasher, and it is about a man with a hook fundamentally killing people.
Exactly.
Crucially. There's just something for me. Like I say, the first time I watched it, when I watched it when I was young, expecting a slasher, and I was like, wow, this is really something different. And I don't know, maybe it's also that, it is so similar to Freddy and Nightmare on Elm Street in terms of, on paper, the mythology, but there's something tonally different, structurally different. I feel like with slasher movies, with Nightmare on Elm Street included, you're watching it to just watch a series of people get killed one by one, really. And the main point of a slasher is the kind of spectacle of you're watching the deaths, really. I feel like with Candyman, it's saying more, or it's doing more. People do get murdered in grisly, horrible ways, but in some ways, for me, it shares a similarity to a lot of the ghost movies we've talked about, which is, that there's a woman at the centre of it who can see this being or believes in this being, and nobody around her believes her. And you've got this kind of psychological, is it paranormal, is she crazy, is she not, is she this kind of hysterical woman that men around her, doctors and police, don't believe, or is she not, or is this being real? And there's all that element to it as well, but I think that's what makes it such a masterpiece, is that it kind of transcends every kind of category, I suppose, for me.
Absolutely. And I kind of, just to bring back the race stuff, it's really interesting in that here, in a lot of ghost stories, it's the family that don't believe, or it's the friends, or whoever it is. But in
the husband,
the husband, exactly. But in this one, the police are kind of a big part of it. You don't often have a ghost story where the police are called.
No,
and so the fact that they don't believe her, I think that kind of ties into into themes of marginalized people not being listened to. And there's even a kind of a line in it where, you know, Helen says something along the lines of, you know, basically it's about all the crimes that have happened there, and the minute a white woman goes in and gets assaulted,
that's it,
then
it's sorted.
They're interested. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then she becomes, you know, part of the marginalized.
Kind of targeted.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really interesting.
Candyman, 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 Candyman. Candyman. Oh, you chicken!
What do you think of Helen Virginia Madsen's sort of lead performance in that movie?
I think it's amazing. I really, really do.
Yeah.
You know, when you sort of when you're a film fan, you see a film with an actor in it, and then you go on and try to watch everything else they've done.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar to Bruce Campbell for me, in that, you know, as many things as you see. I mean, I've watched some terrible films, trying to watch everything Bruce Campbell's ever done.
God, I know.
I've been really disappointed as well. Like, I remember going to see Congo at the cinema because he was credited, and, you know, he's not in it very much.
No.
It's kind of similar with Virginia. Well, it's similar with Virginia Madsen. Obviously, she's done more, but I don't think she's ever done anything that matches Candyman. There's something magical about this film and this performance.
There really is,
yeah, it's just, you just believe, and it's a lot of close-ups on her face.
Yes.
Which, you know, isn't necessarily easy, but she conveys so many different thoughts and emotions in those close-ups that, yeah, it's just a magical performance.
It really is. You have to kind of believe in her for the film to work, I think, really, because we're with her 100%.
Yeah.
And she's fantastic.
And I don't know if it was deliberate, but I'm just going to show Mike a picture now.
Okay.
So this is a woman named Jane Byrne.
Yes.
Right. And there's a slight resemblance with Virginia Madsen, like hair and so on. And she was actually mayor of Chicago in the sort of 70s and then in the 80s. And in 1981, she was really hard on crime and gang crime, and she kind of closed down like a lot of like liquor stores because she felt that they were gang hangouts. And in 1981, she decided to do something quite significant to prove like her dedication to cleaning up like the projects in Chicago, and she actually moved into Cabrini Green, the real Cabrini Green. And she basically announced she was moving there permanently, and she only lasted 3 weeks, and then she moved out again. So yeah, brilliant. I don't know. There's a echo there. There's definitely a resonance. And again, like, I don't know if any of this fed into Bernard Rose's script or film, but that's the weird thing about films like this, is that they're part of the zeitgeist, they're part of the culture, they're part of something that's real.
Yes.
It's like they're voicing something.
Definitely. There is so much to unpick in this film, isn't there, bit by bit as it goes on. You know, when she first goes to the projects and she has the encounter with the man that they all call Candyman.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was kind of thinking, you know, why is this included in the film? Why is there this guy?
I hear you looking for Candyman, bitch. Well, you found him.
Do you think, is the film in any way sort of saying that Candyman, that Tony Todd's Candyman isn't real, and that, you know, the real murders are happening from somebody real, and basically everything else is kind of people's way of dealing with what happens?
You're 100% meant to think that.
Yeah.
For a long while, that sort of that clash is supposed to be in your head, but then I think by the time the film ends, it's pretty much okay. Yeah, this is all real.
Yes.
Yeah. There's one moment at the end. We can say it because we said about spoilers.
We can. Yeah.
And it's one of my favourite images in the film. Oh, I love it so much. I'm getting goosebumps again.
Yeah.
But when the procession of Cabrini Green residents come to the funeral, and that's just an amazing moment. And then the little boy takes the hook out, the real hook, and throws it. It's like, okay, well, something burnt up in there.
Yeah.
Like, he's got that hook from someplace.
Yeah.
And then obviously the very end sting, you know, it all happens. So Candyman is real. But you're definitely meant to be, you know. But there's a certain point where I think it's when the doctor, the guy in the glasses, who really reminds me of the guy who interrogates Sarah Connor at the start of Terminator 2. It's like
totally.
it's the same archetype. But yeah, when he's killed, you're like, well, how could she possibly have done that?
You're right. And he unstraps her from her things.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah. It's just wonderful because they do plant enough seeds of doubt in your mind.
Definitely,
you know, all of the stuff that I completely forgot about as well, where the buildings, these projects have like doorways behind the mirrors.
Yeah.
And that there are literally Candyman, you know, the man they called Candyman literally lived behind a mirror.
Yeah,
and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it was all actually, you know, based on, there's the, you know, I suppose that's the point it's making about urban legends as well, is that it stems from something and then becomes this mythical.
That's really interesting.
Tale or something, you know.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. Like how stories kind of everything's got an element of truth.
Yeah,
even the most, you know, radical horror film.
Yeah.
Has that element of truth to work. Yeah. You have to believe it. And if you believe it, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, totally.
You are not content with the stories, so I was obliged to come. Be my victim. Be my victim.
What about Tony Todd then as Candyman himself?
Oh my God.
So unique, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just wonderful.
And so, Tony Todd was in sort of a couple of films from around this time, the Night of the Living Dead remake, and he also popped up in The Crow, which I went to see at the cinema. I bloody love The Crow.
Yeah.
But this is like his defining. He's also like in an episode of The X-Files, which is quite cool.
And then became famous for the Final Destination films.
Yeah, just bizarre. And actually, he's in Bernard Rose's Frankenstein. Which James is a fan of, and you know, it is something that I watched at his request. It's an interesting film, but Tony Todd in this film, just astonishing. Like, it's everything. It's his voice, obviously, his incredible voice. It's his like physicality.
Yeah,
like
his kind of elegance.
It's his elegance. Yeah, it's the way he moves. And
I am the writing on the wall, the whisper in the classroom. Without these things, I am nothing. So now I must shed innocent blood. Come with me.
You know, the first time we see him in the car properly, in the car park, where he's kind of backlit and like he's standing in that sort of, I mean, talk about iconic. Like, you could draw that outline and, you know, horror fans would know exactly who it was.
And it's the way he stands with his kind of his arms behind his back.
Yeah, and his head kind of up. And
very proud.
Yeah, exactly. So when Bernard Rose was sort of first putting the project together, I think the script kind of got in the hands of activists. And basically it was almost derailed. They almost didn't do it. The producers almost pulled out because it was seen as a racist film. They were worried that you know, why is a black guy doing this? And Bernard Rose, who I think, like, he's one of the great, I don't want to say underrated because people like us think he's amazing, but in terms of like the general
everyday kind of mainstream audience,
exactly, not enough people know him. He's a genius, and he basically said, he's a really honest, down to earth guy, and he just said, look, in these films, I know it sounds weird, but in these films, the slasher's the hero.
Exactly.
Everyone's going to love him. Everyone's going to remember him.
Yeah.
And they were kind of convinced. And he actually, on those terms, kind of reminds me of Frankenstein as well, in that he does the most monstrous, horrific things, like the worst possible things. But you empathize with him, and you feel sorry for him because he's had such a horrific origin. You kind of ignore the fact that he does, like he kills a dog. That's normally not okay. No. I mean, he does worse, but like even that, and in the most, and like obviously kidnaps a baby, and the dedication it took to kill the dog in one room and then squirt all the blood in the crib, that's dark shit.
It really is, and that is a disturbing, brilliant moment when she wakes up.
It's amazing.
The actress who plays Anne-Marie is incredible as well, and I remember that being the moment for me the first time I watched it, going, "Holy shit, this is really horrific!" Like,
I'm not safe.
I'm
here.
not okay with this.
I'm not safe. I don't know what this director's going to do next.
No, absolutely. And you're right. The way that they shoot Candyman, it is wonderful because it, like you said, it's. I never thought of it before, but it is so much like Dracula. It has that kind of Dracula vampiric element to him, that kind of elegance. Also, obviously, like a slasher monster. It's kind of the way that the first few times you see him, he's stood in the distance.
Exactly.
He's like,
that is an amazing shot. So you see Helen kind of like fall back against the car. And then she kind of turns and the camera sort of moves around.
Yes.
And then finally he's revealed, but he's not right there. Like you say, he's right back in the distance.
And then there's that other moment.
It's his silhouette. And it's like, what a shot.
It's it's kind of Michael Myers-esque a little bit as well.
It is actually, yeah. And I've never thought of that.
And there's the bit when then he comes back in the apartment when he kills the friend. And again, it's the same thing. She runs out into the corridor and he's not right there as like a jump scare. He's down the end of the corridor again, looking back at her.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely makes my skin crawl thinking about it now.
Completely. And in terms of building tension, it's genius.
Yeah.
Don't have them right there. Have them at a distance. Have them kind of, it's almost like, not quite, but it's almost like in Ringu, like when Sadako comes out of the TV, and like you see her at the distance, and then she kind of slowly comes towards.
Absolutely.
And that for me is far more scary than any kind of jump scare.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, there are again, similarities to Ringu a little bit there as well, or Ring, a little bit there as well, because you've got this kind of woman uncovering this story who's also kind of under this curse or under this thrall.
Very much so.
Really, really interesting. Yeah.
And there was something I noticed rewatching it for this podcast that I'd never really noticed before, that maybe super obvious, but it's the fact that he's so tied to the project that he appears like it's when she's looking at the photos of the projects, when she's walking through the car park, looking at those projection slides.
Yes.
And it's almost like a vampire, or like a kind of tweak on the vampire mythology. It's like she's, by bringing that area into a different place, she's inviting him in to that place. Because it is really interesting when he first shows up. Like, why does he show up then? Why does he show up there? It's not like anywhere else that we've seen him, where people say the name in the mirror 5 times, and then he pops up, and that's your lot. Again, I suppose a kind of parallel there to a vampire. Inviting him in. He only comes to kill you when you invite him. Exactly. Exactly. Holy shit.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
So there is, this film is incredibly rich, and it's so smart.
It is. It's so, that's what it is. Watching it again, especially this week, I kind of was really like thinking all the time about what could this mean and what could this mean.
Exactly.
That brilliant thing of like linking it to the the real quote unquote Candyman, this guy who is arrested in this lineup, and I was thinking, what's the kind of real life parallel of this, that as somebody who, because they talk about how everyone in Cabrini Green was too scared to ever come forward and prosecute and name him for fear of what would happen to them, but this woman has. But it's almost like saying his name in the mirror. It's like that. She's looking at him in a lineup, which is a 2-way mirror, and she's identifying him, and she's doing the thing that everyone was too scared to do, which is going, "This is the man," and identifying him as this murderer. And then is all hell is unleashed upon her because of it, kind of a thing.
So
Really...
it's a really, that sequence is all kind of really interesting, because what has she done there? She has almost like defeated one of Candyman's emissaries.
Yes,
he's almost like, you know, someone that Candyman has like infected and has sent out to do his bidding. Like he keeps the mythology alive. And so she's defeated him. She's told the little kid, "Don't worry, you know, Candyman's not real," type thing. And that's when he comes.
Yes.
So it's like his legacy is under threat. So
yeah, and again, that's quite a Freddy thing as well, isn't it? It's that thing of you need the fear to live on, kind of.
Totally, very Freddy. And tying into that sort of the idea of artistic legacy and wanting to be remembered. And so he kind of it's almost like he turns her into his sort of his installation.
Yes, exactly. And again, the last shot of the film is that kind of weird mural thing of her.
Yeah, exactly.
That we see.
Exactly.
Yeah. She's like, she almost looks like this kind of deity or something.
Yeah.
Like a saviour, doesn't she?
Yeah, completely.
In that picture. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we've kind of touched upon this already, really, but how important is it that Candyman is black and that Helen is white in this story? I mean, is that really what the whole thing is about?
I mean, it's certainly, you know, it doesn't. I don't think it dives deep enough into race. And actually, in the hands of a different director, this could have been a really dodgy film. You know, one of the fears it's tapping into, you know, it's tapping into some of the fears of marginalised people.
Yes.
And I think that's what makes it a great film. But if it had gone slightly the other way, it could have tapped into a really horrible strain of propaganda from, you know, around the period that people were being segregated in America. This idea that black men are coming to take away your white women. It really, really doesn't. I wouldn't be able to watch it if it did.
No.
And so it is important because all horror films tap into, you know, different fears. I don't think this one taps into that weird propaganda fear.
No.
But I do think that it's significant that, you know, if only because it's the only slasher with like a black, I was going to say all ghost story, but a black villain. You know, it's like kind of comedy horror movies with you know,
exactly.
Black leads, but this, and it's crazy that, you know, as awful as Candyman 3 is, this should have been one of the longest running franchises. And you know, bad films didn't stop Hellraiser from going on and on. Bad films didn't stop Friday the 13th from going on and on.
Exactly.
You know, it's a real shame that this franchise didn't really continue, and it's a real shame that we really haven't seen anything like it since.
No, and it is very balanced, I think, as well. You know, that argument that it's racist. I think that actually, these kind of white middle class academics are portrayed as quite monstrous, most of them, apart from Helen.
Absolutely.
Her husband, the husband's colleague, you know, at the restaurant, awful people, all of them. And then when you get the little boy and you get the character of Anne-Marie, and these are not, you know, cardboard cutout black characters living in the projects, you know.
Even Helen, though, to a certain extent, there is a feeling of, like, you know, poverty tourism to a certain extent.
Totally, you're right. Yeah,
and it that's where it does tie into that sort of that Chicago mayor who moved in for 3 weeks and then was like, oh, actually, no, you know.
Yeah.
Helen sort of is almost like a tourist, and she gets super punished for it. It's a transgression. It is a transgression. So I definitely think that. How weird is it that, you know, for all Candyman does, the guy you really hate in the film is Trevor?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
She could barely look me in the eyes, Trevor, and I swear she was blushing.
Well, I guess that's because she's madly in love with me. Those bursting adolescent hormones. You don't really think?
No, of course not.
Good, I should hope not.
we'll go on to like talking about my favorite horror film, because that's a regular thing you do,
right? Yeah.
But you know, spoiler alert, that will be Rosemary's Baby.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and there's something of the Rosemary's Baby about Trevor, in that it's all what he does off screen.
Yes.
And you do get like clues, like, you know, when Helen goes to see him when he's teaching, and Stacey's there, and it's just on a second watch, it's so obvious what's going on.
Yeah. It's horrible. And it's not that he's an outright horrible character, it's that he's weak and slimy and lying. Again, a little bit like Guy in Rosemary's Baby.
Exactly.
It's that kind of,
that's
even worse than just being a monster.
And it's like the scenes where, like, you know, where she's just come back from being arrested, and he's like, "Oh, I've got to go to pick up some work." And she's like, "Where were you last night?" And he's like, "Oh, I was asleep." And he's clearly going to meet Stacey. Like, he's just basically got settled in. He's like, "Right, I'm off to meet my student." And it's so Rosemary's Baby. It's so where is he really going?
Yeah. It is.
But
you're totally right.
But Trevor is the worst.
He is 100%. Yeah, horrible. And that moment, I do love that moment when she breaks out and she comes to the apartment and finds him, you know, now moving in with this young student.
That is my favourite scene, actually. Like, it's weird to have my favourite scene be one that doesn't actually feature Candyman, but there's something about the way it's staged, and especially the performances in that scene.
Yeah, of all three of them.
Three of them, particularly Stacey. Weirdly, I can't remember seeing someone look so convincingly terrified.
Yes,
and she makes some really interesting choices as an actress. Like, you know, when she goes for the phone, and like, you know, she almost does, like, when she gets caught, like this weird like smile as she retreats, and it's just pure someone who is crippled by terror.
Yes, intimidated, terrified.
What were you going to do, Trevor? Wait till I got out before you told me?
Helen.
You knew I was never coming out, didn't you?
I think we should call the hospital.
Obviously, it's one of Virginia Madsen's best scenes, I think.
Absolutely is, yeah.
You know, the close-ups, and just the sort of the almost like clouds pass over her face, and like she's furious, and then she's accepting, and you know, that moment where she says it's over and she shuts her eyes, that gave me a sting. Horrible. Even rewatching it,
because she said something like, you were my only sort of thing left.
You're all I had left. Something
you're
like
all I had left. Horrible. And again, with Trevor, it's that mix of kind of fear and guilt and everything as well on his face. There's so much going on with all three of them. It's brilliant.
and like, you know, the staging, like the way he comes in with his hands in his pockets, and he sees her, and he takes his hands out of his pockets. And it's like, this is someone who's been caught.
Yes.
This is someone who's getting ready to kind of defend themselves, potentially. All in that one movement. It's just, in terms of acting, that scene is a masterclass.
It's great. And Trevor is great, actually, at the end as well, in the bathroom, when he's having that moment where, of course, now he's really upset that she's gone.
He has those flashbacks, and, like, you know, it's kind of, I think it's a reality for people who do leave families for, like, affairs or whatever, where they're like, oh shit, what have I done?
It's exactly that. And it's amazing, because you barely
such a great scene.
You barely really see them together as a married couple, but you feel that too when he has that sudden flashback to her being in the kitchen. It kind of, you know, it's heartbreaking to watch, isn't it, in a weird way, even though we've not really got any of that in the first place.
Completely. And you almost feel sorry for him. Not quite. Not quite, because it is very satisfying when Helen does pop up.
Exactly. Yeah, it's wonderful.
What's the matter, Trevor? Scared of something?
So, sort of, I was going to ask you, standout sort of moments for you. So that moment with the three of them. What about in terms of your favourite Candyman moment?
So I do think it's that introduction. It's the car park scene. It's you know, the amount of times that, you know, after watching it for the first time, I would just say to myself, Helen.
Yes, Helen. Yes, I know.
Helen.
Yes?
It's just so, you know, it's so like we said earlier, iconic.
Yeah, that's another thing that's quite unusual for a slasher.
And mesmerising.
Yeah, as well, is that apart from with Freddy again, but he talks a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, he talks constantly. You know, the film starts with him sort of narrating almost.
Yeah.
And then every time he's with Helen, he talks and talks and talks and talks. It's almost like everything he says is very kind of almost poetic and lyrical, isn't it?
That's an artist for you. They do talk.
Yeah.
And again, this ties to Frankenstein, more the book than any of the movies, where he's kind of like a groaning lug. But obviously in the book, he's very eloquent and articulate.
Yes.
And he is like a classic Universal monster.
He is actually.
Like, he's like several of them rolled into one.
He is, because there's that thing with the Universal monsters as well. You're scared of them, but there is an element of sympathy with most of them as well. Yeah, there's an element of charm.
So probably that's it. How about you? What's your favourite?
Yeah, I would say probably the same. I do also love, because it's so weird, that moment when he comes down horizontally above her on the stretcher.
Yeah, that's wicked. That's a great shot.
Really creepy.
Yeah,
and then he just kind of disappears down next to her.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of eloquent and weird, and like you say, it's that weird kind of. There are moments of this one. I think this is kind of art housey as well in this movie,
for sure.
It's amazing, and actually, we should talk briefly about the cinematography, which we have a little bit in the way that Candyman is shot, but obviously the film starts with all these amazing kind of aerial shots of the city, of the projects, of the buildings, and all that. And I suppose that's so important.
Yeah,
and it's kind of a mix of that, and then, like you say, these kind of extreme close-ups on Helen and other characters.
The credit sequence is really interesting. Apparently they wanted the words to kind of be like off frame, but it just looked like a mistake, so they kind of, it's kind of Hitchcocky actually.
Yes.
In terms of the sort of the city and the almost experimental approach to like the credit sequence.
You're right. Yeah, it is.
And those shots, man, the God's Eye shots of the city and of the buildings and stuff. Obviously today, and this is one of my great, it's a bugbear for me. It's kind of semi-controversial. I'm sorry to any of my filmmaker friends who are listening. I know it's hard to do stuff on a low budget, but I hate drones. Drones. I think they're kind of because they've now made helicopter style shots easy. We see them everywhere. And they're riffing on films like this and on shots like this where Bernard Rose actually got into a helicopter and there was a human being operating that camera and all the rest of it. So because there's a very religious element to this film as well that we haven't really touched on at all. And so the use of the God's Eye, is like the audience. We are gods looking down on this being played out. And as much as I've tied it to him wanting to be remembered in terms of the legacy of the artist, the original story, and to some extent the film as well, is very much about belief and about how religions can create God simply by everyone believing in them. So I think those shots really tie into that element of the story.
Definitely. And also it feels like from the start it's saying this is a wider story than just this woman and this boogeyman. Again, it's like completely. This is a social commentary. This is
that opening sequence does contain like the one shot that it's fine that it's there, but I've never really got, which is that shot of the bees.
Yes.
Like around the building, I'm like, what is that all about?
I don't know. It's just a wonderful, terrifying image, isn't it? I personally have a bit of a phobia of bees, and they really, wasps and bees, and those scenes. I mean, when the actors actually have them all over their face towards the end, and that's real. Apparently, Virginia Madsen and Tony Todd had them over their face, over their mouth. It's just, I couldn't think of anything worse. It really makes my skin crawl.
That's it. I mean, me too. I've got a phobia of those things. Especially wasps. Not so much especially bees, wasps. But especially wasps. They are bastards.
Yes, they are. They are.
But yeah, it's one of those all too rare moments in a horror film where you feel that the actors are in danger here. Like the actors are being you're super uncomfortable watching it, even though no one's going to get stung or whatever, or it wouldn't be in the film. But it taps into the empathy that's so important for enjoying horror and buying into horror. You're feeling for those actors as much as you are
100%.
for the characters. And it's kind of similar for me with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where you know,
it's the ultimate,
it feels so real that you're worried for everyone in it. Probably, and finding out how it was made, rightly so.
Yes, absolutely horrible. Yeah, exactly that. It is, you know, every fibre of your being is going, this is awful, wrong, this shouldn't be happening to these people.
Exactly.
Kind of yeah, absolutely horrible. You know, again, we've touched upon it already briefly, but the music is... I mean, what is it about the music that makes that suits this film and makes it work so well, do you think?
I think that the music is, like... I don't want to put a percentage on it because I don't want to diminish the other things that make this film so special, but it is a huge part of why it works.
Yeah.
If you had this with like a rock score or like a hip hop score or, you know, whatever, electronic, whatever it is,
or even like kind of John Carpenter-esque or something.
Exactly, it just wouldn't be the same. I mean, the John Carpenter stuff is probably closer to what the film would need if it didn't have this score.
Yeah.
However, it's similar to another Clive Barker, similar to Hellraiser. In that score, that kind of classical score, elevates it and gives it an elegance. You know, I think a lot of where the elegance of the film comes from, it's obviously there in Tony Todd's performance, but you know, it's the score that, you know, it adds to the sense that you're watching high art. You know?
It really does. It's that, I think that's the word, isn't it, to describe so many elements of this film, is elegance. You know, like we said, the cinematography, the performances, the music, everything is so elegant about it. And then it's that weird mix of, you know, when you do get that moment when she wakes up to find the dog's severed head and the baby and the screaming, and suddenly the cinematography is like, it's handheld, everything's covered in blood, everything's manic, and suddenly very real and visceral, and it's like, holy fucking shit, you know.
But that's it. It's exactly that. It's the thought that,
and there's no music at that point as well. Yeah.
You know, it's not a film. I'm not saying this about horror films. I'm saying this about all films. It's not a film where, you know, it's establishing wide, you know, reverse shots. It's every single shot in this film has been really, really planned and thought about. And it's like you said, the bees shot. You know, it's not there by chance. It's there to give you a sense that this is a bigger story. You know, it's like it could potentially envelop the whole city, this story. But you know, obviously what makes it special is the personal element of it.
And even that element of bees, and like you say, the way that it spreads, and it is about obviously spreading the rumour, spreading the story, spreading the myth. And I do actually think that happened in the real world as well, because I think, again, you know, for me at least, as someone who, I don't think this is necessarily a conventional slasher film, but I think that the legend around it is that it's a film where people will go and say his name 5 times in the mirror and then he'll come and kill them, like the opening scene of Candyman. That's kind of what the first time I watched it is what I was expecting, and what I wasn't expecting was that kind of weird psychological turmoil that I was put through for the next sort of 2 hours. And it is amazing, and I think everyone, even people who don't like horror, who haven't seen the film, everyone knows what Candyman is and what that myth is, what that fundamental sort of mirror legend thing is.
Absolutely. And it's very similar to Freddy in that respect, in that, you know, people who haven't seen Nightmare on Elm Street films know the premise. And, you know, obviously he became like a pop culture icon, and you know, I remember in the 80s you could buy like plastic Freddy gloves at the market, and Candyman didn't quite graduate to like plastic hooks.
No, he didn't, did he? It's a funny one.
But it's more that it's the urban myth element of it. You know, I remember watching it with like my first ever girlfriend when I was a teenager, and you know, saying Candyman in the mirror afterwards, and her being terrified all night. And it's so simple, but it's so potent. And I'm 100% certain there are people out there who sort of grew up around that time, who played the Candyman game without ever having seen it.
Have you ever heard of Candyman?
No.
His right hand is sawn off. He has a hook jammed in the bloody stump. And if you look in the mirror and you say his name 5 times, he'll appear behind you, breathing down your neck.
Yeah. I had friends, I probably still do, who are too scared to do that, to say it in the mirror, and too scared to watch the film. It's like there's this shroud of fear around the film, I feel like, as well.
And do you know what? It taps into that's really interesting, because it's almost like, if you, let's say with Ringu, the first time I watched that, another film that terrified me, for some reason I decided to watch it when I was in the house alone.
Me too.
With all the lights off.
On a VHS?
Actually, no, it was on TV. It was on Channel 4.
Yes.
So, some of the jump scares came from the Stella Artois music that they used to play.
That was always so much louder.
So much louder,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, but anyway, like, I watching it, what's so smart about that film is the monster comes out of telly, obviously, and that's in your home, and you're watching it on a telly, probably.
Yeah.
But also the fact that you see the cursed video yourself.
Yes, it's brilliant.
So you're like, am I fucked?
Yeah. 100%.
And so with Candyman, if you watch that film with a mirror in the room,
Yeah.
you're like, oh shit, does that count?
It's amazing. Yeah, exactly. And again, we're going to be talking about this next week, about Ring.
Yeah.
And just the way, and very similar
Can't
to
wait
this.
for that episode.
It's got so much cool stuff to discuss. But again, it was that feeling when Ring first came out, before the remake even, where it wasn't necessarily everywhere yet, but it was that thing of word of mouth. And it was like the Ring curse. And it was like the Candyman thing where you wanted to pass it on. You wanted to tell your friends about it and get them to watch it.
Yeah, completely. It was almost like a weird rite of passage.
It was,
Candyman.
it was.
And it's exactly as you say, like, this film gets made now, would it be the film that we saw in the 90s, or would it be a more straight, we've got this amazing high concept, you say the name in the mirror, let's think of different ways to make them say it without realising that there's a reflection around, maybe like they're reflected in a glass and they don't notice, and then Candyman pops out of a glass.
Exactly.
They'd be playing around with that premise, whereas this kind of abandons it and actually doesn't stick to the rules.
It doesn't
at
really.
all.
And actually, there's I think 3 moments in the whole film where people say Candyman in the mirror. So there's the opening scene, there's when Helen says it, and then there's the scene with the doctor where she says it again.
Exactly.
And that's basically it.
And they're all different. So the opening scene, like, kind of, he's got time to come downstairs, hasn't he?
Yes.
And then
and also they say it between them. She says it the first 4 times and then he says it, or vice versa, or whatever it is.
And then obviously Helen says it and he just doesn't appear.
No.
And it's like, oh, okay, and then you kind of think that because he can pop up, he's kind of tied to Helen, by that point. If he wanted to pop up at the doctor's, he just could have.
Yeah.
But for some reason, they then decide that she's going to be next to a mirror and call him.
Yeah.
But I guess that's what it is. Like, that's her crossing the threshold, to sort of move more into his camp. She actually asked for his help.
Yes.
So that's interesting. Another thing I have to say is that in terms of structure, this has one of the best kind of midpoints I've seen. And so in case anyone out there isn't a screenwriting geek, a lot of films, good films, the first half will, of whatever runtime it is, the first half will build to a moment that then kind of inverts the first half. So if you think of it as you're going uphill, you reach the peak in the middle, and then you go downhill. And so this has one of the great sort of midpoint builds where she's investigating him, and then almost, not quite, but almost the exact midpoint is when she sees him in the car park, and then he's real. And it's amazing. Then she has to deal with that.
And it's amazing that is, you have to wait till midway through the film for that to actually happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just, structurally perfect as well.
It is.
What a film Candyman is.
Seriously. I mean, it's a proper horror masterpiece. And for me, I would put it up there with movies like Texas Chainsaw, which is pretty much my favourite ever horror movie. And because it seems to transcend anything, and it's one of those movies as well that is like full of images. We talked about this with The Shining as well, where it's like these images don't entirely make sense, but they're just there to absolutely like get you in your subconscious in some way as well.
I love that. That's one of the things I most love about these kinds of movies, where it's definitely there in Hellraiser as well.
Oh
where
god, yeah.
You have these arbitrary shots that they definitely didn't need, but apparently they waited days to get, like the cockroach coming out from under the maggots and all that stuff.
Yes.
Where it's borders on the surreal.
Yes.
And I guess, the surreal is a really, really important element of horror and of great horror.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
Because, we feel fear when we're shocked or surprised. And the only way to shock and surprise us is to give us something we're not expecting.
Yeah.
And so this film is full of... And I guess maybe that's why it's clever not to follow its own rules.
Brilliant, yeah.
Because, you you never feel safe. You never feel like you know what's coming next.
Yeah.
And that's rare,
And it's 25, 26 years old now. Do you think it's dated at all?
Has it dated? Surprisingly not really.
No.
I mean,
I think it's because, like you say, it's got that very kind of classical score and everything is quite old-fashioned in the filmmaking anyway, in a sense, isn't it?
And even kind of the fashion where, it's kind of... We've come out of the 80s and we're now kind of in the 90s in terms of, and so a lot of the clothes in this kind of look like pretty much how people would dress today.
They're not kind of as out there as you might have gotten a few years earlier.
That doesn't date it. The music doesn't date it because, it's classical. I think, if there's anyone out there, sorry we've spoilt it quite a great amount, but, or let's say if there's anyone out there who hasn't watched it in a while, they should definitely give it another spin.
Definitely. It's so dense. There's so much incredible stuff to unpick. And just very, very briefly, I think I've seen the second one. I've never seen the third one. What are your thoughts generally on the sequels?
So, I actually worked at the cinema. I worked at the Odeon when the second one came out. And this is how much of a lame film person I am. My entire family, well, except for my big sister, but my family were all going on a trip to America for Christmas. They're going to spend Christmas in America. And my sister was staying behind because she had to work. And technically, I could have gone on the trip to America for Christmas. But I knew that Candyman 2 was going to be out and I would miss it. So I ended up staying behind. I lied. Sorry, Mum, if you're listening to this. I lied and said that I couldn't get out of the shifts that I had over Christmas at the cinema. And
that is brilliant.
Yeah, I ended up watching it on Christmas Eve.
That's amazing.
Sadly, it's not great.
It's not.
It kind of builds on the mythology a bit, but it's nowhere near. I mean, it's a little bit dodgy in places. Like it kind of. I haven't watched it. Certainly haven't watched it as many times as I watched Candyman. But I have this memory of jump scares just because a black person is there.
Yes.
And it's like, yeah, guys, no, that's not okay. So, no, I'm not a fan. And 3 is atrocious. It's even worse. So, I don't necessarily recommend anyone hunts out the franchise, but what I would like is an updated version, or a new version. I know Virginia Madsen. She recently on Instagram posted a still from the ending, and basically, hashtag said, wouldn't it be great to do another one of these, and hashtagged it Candy Woman.
Brilliant. Yes.
So, I mean, I would kind of like to see an exploration maybe of gender issues.
Yes.
Using this concept. That might be interesting.
Yep. Could work very well right now, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Like having Candy Woman used as a weapon against these kinds of people could be interesting. I don't know. But I'd certainly... I just wish there had been more. As bad as the sequels are, I do wish that they'd have just kept on going and maybe struck gold, but at number 8 or something like that. You never know.
Yeah. Brilliant. So just a few final quickly round off questions. I mean, branching out away from Candyman, but just looking at the kind of ghost subgenre in general, what do you have a favourite? Do you have a favourite kind of haunted house film, ghost movie? Yeah,
I mean, for me, Ringu is up there, but you're going to go quite in depth on that. So would you count Carnival of Souls as a ghost film?
Yeah, I would actually.
Yeah,
it was a bad glaring omission actually, but I absolutely would.
And that is not just one of my favourite sort of ghost, because the reason I ask is it's not a traditional.
No,
it's exploring those ideas, but in a very, very different way to, like, say, a haunted house film.
Yeah, and it's very psychological in a way as well, isn't it?
Exactly, and beautiful and just insanely ahead of its time in terms of how it was shot and performances and iconography, and it's one that apparently inspired George Romero to make Night of the Living Dead. And you can certainly see the imagery there.
Definitely.
I think it's a kind of a big influence on David Lynch.
Yes,
and I'm a huge Lynch person. I was very lucky to interview him.
No, you didn't.
Yeah.
Oh my god, it's my dream.
Tell you what, that was weird, right? So talk about kind of spooky. So I interviewed him for Inland Empire, and I asked him about the meditation stuff, and he said like this weird thing about when you meditate, people come and sit down next to you, and you don't know who it could be, but people sit next to you. And I was like, okay. And so I went away, and it kind of stayed with me. And like my mum, because he was talking about it, my mum had heard about it on the radio, and she wanted to try it out. So I went with her to try this meditation thing. It was actually really good. So anyway, the next year, the opportunity comes to interview him again, this time more in depth about the meditation stuff. And I'm sitting at the hotel, and you do junkets, what it's like. You basically, you sit at the hotel and kind of wait for the PR to come down, take you up in the lift, and then, you go into the room, you do the interview.
It's like being in the dentist waiting room and getting calls.
Exactly. And so, I'm sat there waiting for the PR, and someone comes and sits next to me, and I turn, and it's David Lynch. And I was like, this never happens.
Never happens.
You never see the talent until you're in the room.
Yeah.
B, if they come through that space, they're just being walked through.
Yes.
And he just sat down next to me, and he's like, "Hi, Sam." And I was like, A, how did you remember me from a year ago?
God.
B, why are you sitting next to me? It's the most surreal, wonderful experience of my life. And then I told him that I tried the meditation out.
Oh, I bet he loved that.
He loved it, and great interview. But anyway,
he is my absolute hero. The thing is, as well, he's much more likely to want to talk about that kind of stuff than his films, isn't he? That's the problem. Is that asking him about his films. My colleague who works on the film show with me, who was I wasn't working on it back then, and when Inland Empire came out, and again, I work on a film show, and she had to sort of say, what's this film about? And it was just very much a lot of, well, what do you think it's about?
I think I asked what the film's about, and I think he said something like, it's about balancing on the edge of a duck's bill. And I was like, great, that'll do for me. Yeah.
I love him. Absolutely love him.
So
brilliant. And then, okay, briefly, final question: your favorite horror movie? So you've mentioned already.
Yeah, so it is Rosemary's Baby. For me, Rosemary's Baby is just one of the best written films ever made. It's the best structured in terms of the performances, and for me, it is like a magic trick, because you could someone could make a parallel movie about what's happening behind the scenes, and it's so well timed. And I'm a real, I love scripts, I love structure, and so just the idea that it works perfectly off screen.
Yes.
And what you're watching on screen is fascinating, but just in the build, and obviously the ending, and every single performance in it, and
so wonderful.
Outside of horror, I love John Cassavetes, and as a director, he's one of my favourites, and he's so fucking good and horrible in that film.
So one of the most despicable characters in all of cinema.
And just incredibly scary and disturbing, and know, man, if there's anyone out there who hasn't seen Rosemary's Baby, then get on it. It's just a masterpiece. It's a treat waiting for you.
It really is. And also talking about some of the best horror music as well.
Oh, God,
incredible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful. And what's the scariest you've seen a lot of scary movies that have scared you. What's the scariest you've ever been watching a movie?
God, what's the scare? It could be Ringu, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
The original Blair Witch was freaky.
Yeah.
And that was another one where I didn't feel safe in the hands of the filmmakers.
Yeah.
And, you know, watching it when it was first out, when it was still ambiguous as to, you know, this was before the found footage thing where everything was like, we found these tapes. But then you're like, did they? Didn't they?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think sort of maybe Blair Witch, but even though we've discussed it already, I will never forget the experience of watching Ringu.
Yes.
In that living room and just thinking, fucking hell, what have I done?
When you turn it off and you just pray to God the phone wasn't going to ring as well. It was awful. Yeah.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh,
Sam.
no, thank you,
It's been
Mike.
wonderful. Where can
it's been
people
great.
find you on social media, that kind of thing?
So I'm on Twitter at Sam Ashurst, which is SAMASHURST. And then I'm also on Instagram, which is at SAMASHURST23. And I've been putting up kind of bits and pieces around Frankenstein's creature, and I'll carry on doing that as I go on the journey. So
Brilliant.
If you want to follow the kind of making of my first horror film, then follow me on there.
Love it. And Arrow Video Podcast, you can find that on iTunes and all the usual places.
Yeah,
can't you?
absolutely. Yeah, and that goes out every couple of weeks. And I think, the next episode is Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which is a masterpiece. And then we've got Blade of the Immortal coming up after that.
Brilliant.
So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, mate.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my brilliant guest, Sam Ashurst. Sam, please come back again soon. It's been a pleasure. So, what do you think of Candyman? Is it the masterpiece that me and Sam think it is? Get in touch, send us your thoughts. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, or tweet us at evolutionpod, or drop us a message on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. Discuss this week's episode and Candyman with other listeners and join the discussion group that can be found on Facebook, the Evolution of Horror discussion group. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, if you get a chance, please do drop a little rating or review on iTunes. It's really, really helpful. And on that note, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's given me a lovely review on iTunes, including Robert Aikman, Dobby624, and Fresh Brown Turkey. What a fantastic name. That's made me hungry. Thank you so much to all of those people who dropped me a lovely review. So, next week we're into a very, very exciting period. Towards the late 90s into the dawn of the 21st century, the ghost story saw a real boom again. The slashers started to die down and supernatural horror came back in a big way. And I think it's mainly due to a few films that came out over in Japan, a collection of terrifying supernatural movies that became known as J-horror. Next week we are going to be discussing all things J-horror, and we're going to be giving you spoilerific, in-depth reviews of two of the best and most iconic J-horror movies. That is Ringu from 1998 and Ju-on the Grudge from 2002. We're going to be discussing those movies in spoilerific detail, and we'll also be littering the episode with other spoiler-free reviews of other J and K horror classics like Pulse, Dark Water, The Eye, and A Tale of Two Sisters. Loads and loads of stuff to get through next week. And joining me to discuss all of these films, I'm very, very excited. I've got another brand new guest to the podcast. She is a film journalist, she is editor of Digital Spy, and she is a huge horror movie fan. It is the brilliant Rosie Fletcher. So me and Rosie will be sitting down to discuss all things J-horror next week. Join me then for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.